Winston's voice was always too loud for the small executive kitchen at Caldwell Freight Lines, but he wanted everyone near the coffee machine to hear him. "Innovation comes from the youth, Roland," he said, clapping a heavy hand onto my shoulder. It was the exact same performative tone he used at the Thanksgiving table when he told the family how he built the logistics firm from a single truck, conveniently forgetting the 80-hour weeks I had put in over the past 6 years to save his largest freight lanes from going bankrupt. "I am Roland Vance, 54 years old, and for the last 6 years, I have been the Senior Operations Director at Caldwell Freight Lines. More accurately, I am the son-in-law, which in Winston Caldwell's empire meant I was the guy who cleaned up the mess while he took his extended golf trips to Florida. My wife, Elena Vance, who is 49, always told me to be patient with her dad. He is just old school, Roland," she would say over dinner. "He wants to make sure the family legacy is secure, but legacy does not negotiate vendor exclusivity or fix a broken routing database at 2 in the morning. I did. I rebuilt our entire distribution grid. I turned a chaotic department running on spreadsheets into a streamlined machine with 22% growth year over year. Nobody clapped for me. Hell, I think half the office still treated me like a glorified assistant who married into the boss's family. So when Winston walked into the office on a Tuesday morning with a kid who looked like he had just gotten his driver's license, I knew the wind was shifting. "This is Preston," Winston announced, beaming like a proud grandfather. "Preston is Wallace's son. You remember Wallace from the country club, Roland? Preston just finished his marketing degree. He is going to be interning with us, learning the ropes." Preston stood there in a blazer that still had the factory folds in the shoulders, holding a leather notebook like it was a shield. His teeth were too white, his handshake too firm, and he wore dress shoes that looked like they had never touched actual asphalt in their existence. I gave him a polite nod. "Welcome aboard," I said. "We have a lot of data pipelines to run through." Winston waved his hand dismissively. "Do not drown the boy in spreadsheets on day one, Roland. Let him get a feel for the culture." Preston smiled, looking around the open office. "Yeah, I want to see the big picture stuff. I am really interested in strategic growth." I went back to my desk. I had 48 emails from Summit Logistics regarding our exclusive freight lanes and a draft proposal for Apex Tracking, our largest client. Apex made up 18% of our annual revenue. I had spent 7 months negotiating a customized routing integration that would lock them into a 3-year contract renewal. It was my baby. I wrote the code, mapped the regional distribution nodes, and secured the logistics waivers that saved them $140,000 in monthly overhead. Winston's only contribution was taking the Apex executives out to steak dinners and signing the final page. Within 3 days, Preston was moved from the generic intern desk to a window office 2 doors down from mine. He had dual monitors, a brand new ergonomic chair, and a standing desk. I was still working off the same cracked laptop I had used since I started. Preston spent his mornings wandering around the department with a coffee cup, asking my coordinators questions like, "What is the synergy here?" Or "How do we scale this narrative?" On Friday afternoon, he walked into my office. "Hey, Roland," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Winston said I should look at the Project Elevate docs, the Apex rollout. Do you have the login for the Summit API?" I looked up from my screen. "Onboarding takes 2 weeks, Preston. Have you read the Summit exclusivity clauses yet? Especially Section 7 on regional operational liaisons. It is complicated." Preston waved his hand, echoing Winston's gesture perfectly. "Oh, I will figure it out. I am pretty quick with tech. Just send me the raw files." I did not argue. I sent him the link to the public training manual and nothing else. The next week, the rumors started. It began with whispers by the water cooler and a misdirected calendar invite from the CFO's admin. There was a big announcement coming. Everyone in my department was excited. They kept slapping my back and saying, "Roland, this is it. Winston is finally putting you in the driver's seat. You built this entire Apex system from scratch." I tried to stay grounded, but that tiny candle of hope in the back of my mind flickered to life anyway. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe Winston did recognize the work. On Thursday, the bagels arrived. That was my first clue that something was wrong. In our office, bagels meant bad news. The last time Winston ordered catering, He outsourced the entire customer service department to a call center in another state, and the staff found out when they walked in and saw cream cheese spreads. We all filed into the main conference room. I sat in my usual spot, halfway down the table on the left. Winston walked in last wearing his best suit, followed by Preston. Preston was carrying a laptop and looking nervous but excited, like a kid about to open a Christmas present. Winston cleared his throat, leaning his hands on the table. "Team," he began, his voice booming with that false warmth he used for public relations. "As you know, we are on the verge of launching Project Elevate, our new integrated routing system for Apex tracking. This project represents the future of Caldwell Freight Lines." He paused, looking around the room. "We need fresh eyes to guide this future. We need the energy of the next generation. That is why I am thrilled to announce that Preston will be leading Project Elevate as our strategic director of operations." The silence that followed was heavy. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. My team looked at me, their faces blank with shock. The lead developer started to cough, then stopped. Winston smiled, completely oblivious or pretending to be. Preston stood up, smoothing his blazer. "Thanks, Winston. I am really excited to quarterback this transition. We are going to disrupt the market." I stared at the presentation slide. I did not say a word. I just raised my hands and clapped. 3 slow, polite claps. The rest of the room followed, hesitantly, like they were applauding at a funeral. Winston did not look at me once during the entire meeting. My name was not on a single slide. The 7 months of code, the database architecture, the supplier agreements I had signed my name to, all of it was presented as a blank canvas that Preston was going to paint. After the meeting, I went back to my office, closed the door, and took out a clean sheet of paper. I did not yell. I did not throw things. I just looked at the calendar. My exclusive Summit liaison clause had a 30-day notice requirement, and the Apex pilot was scheduled to launch in exactly 14 days. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had worn in months. Winston's office always smelled like overpriced mahogany polish and bad executive decisions. On his desk sat a gold-plated golf trophy and a framed photo of him shaking hands with some state senator who got indicted 2 years later. When I knocked and walked in without waiting for his invite, he was on the phone, waving a finger to tell me to wait. "Yeah, Wallace," he was saying, laughing into the receiver. "Preston is going to quarterback the whole Apex rollout. We are putting fresh blood in the driver's seat. Roland is going to support him." "Yep, talk soon." He hung up the phone and looked at me, his face shifting into a performative mask of paternal warmth. "Roland, buddy, big day, right? I hope you are ready to show Preston the ropes on the Summit integration. We need to make sure the kid has everything he needs to look good for the board." I did not answer. I just walked up to his mahogany desk and laid a crisp white envelope directly on top of the Apex status report he was ignoring. "What is this?" Winston asked, his eyebrows knitting together. "My resignation," I said, "effective 2 weeks from today." Winston stared at the envelope. For a second, he did not move. Then he slowly reached out, opened the flap, and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It contained exactly 1 sentence. "I, Roland Vance, resign from my position as Senior Operations Director, effective July 28th. He looked up, his jaw slightly slack. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No joke, Winston," I said. "I will spend the next 14 days wrapping up my files and ensuring a clean handoff." He leaned back in his leather chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "Come on, Roland. Let us be adults here. Is this about the Apex project? You are taking this personally." "It is professional, Winston," I replied. "You decided Preston was the right fit to lead the project. I am deciding Caldwell Freight Lines is no longer the right fit for my career. You cannot just walk out." Winston's voice rose, losing its polished edge. "We are 2 weeks away from the pilot launch. You built the routing system. Preston needs your support. Your family, for God's sake. Elena's father is the CEO. Think about how this looks." I thought about how it looked when he announced a 23-year-old marketing graduate was leading my 7-month project. I did not say that, though. I just smiled. "You made your decision, Winston. I have made mine. I will make sure the database is updated." I turned and walked out before he could start shouting. As soon as I got back to my desk, I opened my phone and sent an email to the legal department at Summit Logistics. I copied Sylvia, their director of operations. The subject line was Contractual Liaison Update Caldwell Freight Lines. The body was brief. Per Section 7 of our freight agreement, this email serves as official notice that Roland Vance will be leaving Caldwell Freight Lines, effective 14 days from today. Section 7 was a tiny clause I had negotiated into the contract when Summit tried to raise their shipping rates by 15% last year. I had agreed to the rate increase only on the condition that Summit would assign a dedicated operations liaison, me, and that any transfer of the liaison role required a 30-day written notice and mutual approval. Summit's legal team had agreed because they trusted my coordination. Winston had not even read the clause. He just saw that the rates were settled and signed the contract during a lunch break. I spent the next 2 weeks cleaning out my office. I did not make a scene. I did not tell my team the details. I just archived my emails, cleaned up my personal files, and organized my handoff notes. I left the folders for the Apex project exactly where they were supposed to be. But I removed my personal login credentials from the automated script that retrieved the Summit pricing APIs. Without my security token, the scripts would return a restricted access error. By my final Friday, the office was quiet. Winston had not spoken to me since the resignation. Preston had spent the last 2 weeks in meetings with the marketing team, designing a new logo for Project Elevate and drafting a press release. He had not asked me a single question about the routing architecture. At 5 p.m., I packed my notebook and my coffee mug into a cardboard box. I walked out of the building without a farewell email or a card. That evening, Elena was waiting for me at the kitchen table. She had ordered takeout from our favorite place, but she had not touched her food. "So you really did it?" she said, looking at me with a mix of worry and curiosity. I set the box on the floor and sat down. "I did," she sighed. "My dad called me 3 times today. He is furious, Roland. He says you are ruining the family business because of your ego." "Do you think it is my ego, Elena?" I asked. She looked at my hands, rough from years of late-night warehouse audits, then at my tired eyes. "No," she said quietly. "I know how hard you worked. I just hope you know what you are doing." I smiled, opening the container of noodles. "I know exactly what I am doing." On Monday morning, I did not set an alarm. I woke up at 8 a.m., made a cup of black tea, and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was register a new limited liability company, Vance Operations Group. I spent $500 on the filing fees and bought a domain name. By 10 a.m., my phone started buzzing. It was a message from one of my former routing coordinators. "Hey Roland, sorry to bother you, but Preston is trying to run the Summit API script, and it is throwing a 403 forbidden error. Do you know where the backup token is?" I did not reply. I was no longer an employee of Caldwell Freight Lines. By 1 p.m., the panic had spread to the executive suite. Preston had apparently called Summit Logistics directly. According to my contact inside, Preston had demanded that Summit unlock the API immediately, claiming he was the new strategic director. Summit's representative had politely informed him that per Section 7 of their contract, Roland Vance was the only authorized liaison, and any change in operational leadership required a 30-day notice that had only been submitted 10 days prior. Until that notice period expired and Summit Legal approved the new liaison, all automated data exchanges were suspended. This meant the Apex pilot, scheduled to launch in 4 days, had no live freight data. The routing system was blind. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed Caldwell Freight Lines. I let it ring. It rang again 10 minutes later. I put the phone on silent and went for a walk in the park. For the first time in 6 years, the sun was shining, and I was not thinking about a late shipment. By the second week of my departure, the cracks in the dam were widening into a flood. My former coordinator, who was still trying to survive under Preston's strategic direction, kept me updated through text messages. It was not just Summit Logistics that had ground to a halt. Apex Tracking had flagged our account. When I negotiated the Apex agreement, I had secured a timeline penalty waiver. It was a sweet deal that saved Caldwell Freight Lines up to $8,000 per delayed delivery. But I had written that waiver with a specific clause. The waiver was active only while the implementation was personally managed by Roland Vance. Without my signature on the weekly tracking audits, Apex immediately suspended the waiver and retroactively billed Caldwell Freight Lines for 3 delayed shipments from the previous month. That was $24,000 in unexpected fees in a single week. Preston's solution to the billing discrepancy was to ignore the invoices. He scheduled a 2-hour brainstorming session with the marketing team to rebrand our client portal. Meanwhile, the actual gateway was locked and the trucks were sitting idle. On Tuesday afternoon, my phone lit up with Winston's name. I was sitting in a quiet, sunlit co-working space downtown, drinking hot tea. I had rented the suite the day before using a security deposit paid by a small logistics startup that had hired me to review their routing schemas. I let the phone ring until it stopped. 20 minutes later, it rang again, same caller. I ignored it. By the 4th attempt, I decided it was time to answer. "Roland!" Winston's voice came through, loud and dripping with false camaraderie. "How are you, buddy? How is the time off treating you?" I took a slow sip of tea. "I am doing well, Winston." Good, good. Listen, we have had a couple of minor hiccups with the Apex launch. Just some technical snags with the data exchange. You know how these IT systems can be. I was thinking we could bring you in for a few days, just to help Preston clear up these bottlenecks. For the good of the company, of course. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the city skyline. "I do not work for Caldwell Freight Lines anymore, Winston. I am consulting full-time now through Vance Operations Group." Winston's voice stiffened. "Right, well, we can hire your group. Just a short-term contract, say 10 hours a week, to answer Preston's questions and jump up on the supplier calls. What kind of hourly rate are we talking about?" I opened a spreadsheet on my laptop. I had already calculated the numbers. "I will send you a formal proposal, Winston," I said. "But to give you a heads up, my standard contract requires a monthly retainer, a 90-day minimum commitment, and my fee is a $180 per hour." "That is triple your old salary," Winston barked, his polite veneer vanishing. "You are trying to gouge your own family, Roland." I smiled. "My old salary was for an employee, Winston. This is for an expert who owns the routing logic. I will email the contract. Let me know if the board approves." I hung up before he could respond. The next day, my contact inside the company sent me a copy of a voicemail Preston had left for a vendor. The kid sounded like he was on the verge of tears, stammering about database credentials and asking if they could bypass the security protocols just for 1 week. The vendor had refused, citing federal data security regulations. At Caldwell Freight Lines, the blame game had reached a fever pitch. According to my inside sources, Preston was telling everyone the routing software I built was outdated and buggy. Winston was screaming at the IT staff, demanding they crack my personal security token. The IT director, a guy who had worked with me for 4 years, told Winston that my code was encrypted and trying to force it open would trigger a system lockdown that would paralyze the entire network. Meanwhile, Apex Tracking was noticing the delays. The pilot launch was supposed to happen on Friday, but they had not received their testing credentials or their shipping schedules. Their operations lead had sent a sharply worded email to Winston, demanding to know why the system integration was offline. Preston's reply had been a 5-page PowerPoint deck outlining the long-term vision of Caldwell Freight Lines. The Apex lead had not replied. I spent my Thursday afternoon preparing 3 proposals for new clients who had reached out to me through LinkedIn. They were mid-sized transport firms that had heard about the database I built for Caldwell. Word travels fast in the logistics industry. People do not care about family names or country club golf scores. They care about whether their trucks arrive on time and their costs stay low. On Friday morning, I received a wire notification on my phone. Winston had accepted my consulting proposal. The transfer was for the first month's retainer, paid in advance. A few minutes later, an email arrived from Winston's personal account. It contained no text, just the signed contract attached. I printed the confirmation out and taped it to the wall of my co-working space. I labeled it my favorite apology. But my consulting agreement was only the first phase. Winston thought he had bought my compliance and my silence. What he did not realize was that I had only agreed to answer questions and provide data handoffs. I had not agreed to give them my intellectual property, and the real trap was about to spring. The corporate ballroom at the Hilton was quiet, but the air felt heavy. It was the annual logistics gala. I was there as a guest of a firm that had hired me to optimize their shipping lanes. I was standing near the buffet, chatting with their lead architect, when I felt a pair of eyes on me. I turned and saw Winston. He was standing at the bar, holding a half-empty glass of scotch. He looked older than 68 today. His suit was slightly loose and his hair looked flat. He stared at me, his mouth pressed into a thin line. He did not come over, he couldn't. He knew what was happening. The previous Tuesday, the board of Caldwell Freight Lines had called an emergency session. A leaked copy of the meeting notes had reached my inbox. According to the transcript, the meeting had started with Winston trying to reassure the directors. "We have hit a few minor potholes with the Apex rollout," he had said. "But Preston has the vision. We are restructuring the workflows to align with modern synergies." Then the lead strategist from Apex Tracking, who was dialing in from their corporate headquarters, had cut Winston off. "With all due respect, Winston, your new team could not find a project timeline if you nailed it to their foreheads. The pilot is supposed to be live and our dashboard is blank. We are terminating our contract with Caldwell Freight Lines effective at the end of the month." Winston had stammered, trying to explain the summit data lock. "We are bringing Roland back on a consulting retainer to resolve the technical integration. It will be sorted in 48 hours. The Apex strategist had not hesitated. "Do not bother. We have already signed a direct services contract with Roland's new firm, Vance Operations Group. If Caldwell Freight Lines wants to handle our freight deliveries, your staff will coordinate through Roland. He has the exclusive rights to the routing dashboard." The silence in the boardroom had lasted for a full 10 seconds. "What do you mean he has the rights?" Winston had demanded, his voice cracking. "He was our employee. The code belongs to the company." At that point, Caldwell's chief legal counsel, a woman who had spent 15 years keeping the company out of court, had cleared her throat and slid a red folder across the table. "Actually, Winston," she had said, her tone flat, "we have a problem." She opened the file and pointed to the exit agreement Winston had signed 2 weeks prior, Section D, Clause 4B. I had drafted that separation agreement myself using a boilerplate document, but I had made one modification. I had inserted a clause stating that all custom software frameworks authored by Roland Vance that were not explicitly claimed as company intellectual property in a registered patent or copyright filing prior to July 1 would remain the sole property of the author under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106. Winston had been so eager to sign my exits papers and get me out of the building so Preston could take credit that he had not sent the document to legal. He had just signed it in his office, stamped it, and sent it to HR. Legal had explained the implications to the board. The route optimization algorithm Roland built is a custom framework. The company never filed a patent. By signing this agreement, you conceded the copyright to Roland. He owns the operating spine of Project Elevate. We cannot legally run the Apex pilot without his software license. The CFO had dropped his pen. Winston had gone pale, sweat beads gathering at the back of his neck. "This is ridiculous. He is my son-in-law. It was a family company. Surely we have a right of use." "No," legal had replied, "we do not." In the corner of the boardroom, Preston had sat in silence. He had not said a word during the entire meeting. Slowly, he had closed his laptop, stood up, and walked out of the room. Nobody had stopped him. By 5 p.m., he had deleted Caldwell Freight Lines from his LinkedIn profile. The board chair, a senior investor who owned 30% of the company's shares, had leaned forward. "We want you to negotiate, Winston, and we want you to do it before Apex files a breach of contract lawsuit." I took a sip of my drink, looking back at Winston at the bar. He slowly turned away, leaving his scotch on the counter, and walked out the exit doors. I did not follow him. The final negotiation did not take place in Winston's office. It happened in the main boardroom of Caldwell Freight Lines with a court reporter present and 3 board members sitting on my side of the table. Winston sat at the far end, looking like a spectator at his own trial. His lawyers had tried to find a loophole in Section D, Clause 4B of the exit agreement for 3 days. They found nothing. Under federal intellectual property law, the routing software code belonged to Vance Operations Group. "Here are our terms," I said, sliding the fresh contract across the glass table. Winston did not even look at the paper. How much? He asked, his voice low and raspy. A flat licensing fee of $15,000 per month for the use of the routing software, I said, plus a monthly consulting retainer of $12,000 for my firm to manage the API endpoints. Winston's jaw tightened. That is nearly $320,000 a year, Roland. You are bleeding us. No, Winston, I replied. I am charging you the market value of the system that keeps your largest client from suing you for breach of fiduciary duty. If you do not sign, Apex terminates their freight contract tomorrow. The lead board member leaned over to Winston. Sign it, Winston, he whispered. We do not have a choice. Winston reached for his pen. His hand shook slightly as he pressed the black ink into the signature line. He signed, stamped it, and pushed the folder back to me. I checked the signature, closed the folder, and slipped it into my briefcase. Thank you, gentlemen, I said, standing up. I will have the Summit API tokens reactivated by 5 p.m. today. As I walked out of the room, Winston called after me. Roland! I paused at the door, turning back. He looked at me, his eyes hollow. I built this company from nothing. I thought family was supposed to support family. I looked at him, remembering the 3 years of 80-hour weeks, the missed anniversary dinners with Elena, and the way he had introduced a golf buddy's son as the future of the company while I sat in the corner. Family is supposed to respect family, Winston, I said. You wanted a business partner, so I became one. I walked out the double doors, down the elevator, and into the afternoon sun. That evening, Elena and I sat on our porch. My dad called me, she said quietly, setting her phone down. He said you saved the Apex account. I took a sip of my drink. I did. Are you guys going to be okay? She asked. Professionally? Yes. Personally? We will see, I said, but I am no longer working for his approval, Elena, and that is worth every penny of the licensing fee. She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. Good. The next morning I arrived at my co-working space. I had 2 new emails from former Caldwell Freight Lines clients asking for service terms. Winston always thought clients were loyal to the company logo on the letterhead. But the clients did not care about the name. They cared about the database that kept their shipments from getting lost. I built my company with contracts, leverage, and a long memory. And now the guy who used to sit in the corner office without a nameplate had become the most essential name in the building.